guys! Come with me to make pâte choux and Brazilian cheese puffs. Here are the ingredients I will need for the pâte choux. I started by preheating the oven to 425 degrees. Then I poured my water, butter, and salt into the saucepan. I put it on a medium heat. I measured out my flour. Once it was at a rolling boil, I removed it from the heat and added in the flour. Then I stirred until the mixture came together and resembled mashed potatoes. Then I put the pan back on the low heat to dry out the dough. I set a timer for 3 minutes. To see if it was done, I made sure that the wooden spoon would stand up on its own. Then I transferred the dough into the mixing bowl. I added in the paddle attachment and set it on a low speed. I mixed for about a minute. I made sure the dough was just warm to the touch. Then I added in the eggs. I added them in 4 additions, waiting for each to be absorbed and for the dough to smooth out before adding the next. I scraped down the sides of the bowl in between each addition. At the end, the dough came together to be a very smooth and creamy batter. Then I put the dough into a piping bag. I snipped off the end of the bag and piped golf-sized puffs directly onto the baking sheet. I made sure they were about 2 inches apart. I also dipped my finger in some water and pat down the tops of the puffs to prevent burning. Once they were done, I turned down the oven to 350 degrees and baked for 10 more minutes. To ensure they were done, I tapped on the bottom of them to make sure it sounded hollow. Then I pricked them with a sharp knife to release the steam. Okay, taste test time. I'm gonna try one that didn't puff up as much and one that was really puffy. Let's do the puffy one first. Okay, now I'm gonna try the deflated one. So the puffed up one is crispy on the outside and light and airy on the inside, and the one that was a little bit deflated is more moist and chewy on the inside, but still crispy on the outside. So since I decided not to add cheese, I decided to make it sweet and add ice cream and chocolate sauce to it. Here are the cream puffs with the chocolate sauce and the ice cream. Bon appetit! Here are all the ingredients I will need for the Brazilian cheese puffs. I started by preheating the oven to 450 degrees. Then I measured out the 10 ounces of tapioca flour I will need using a scale. Then I added my oil, milk, and salt to the saucepan and put it on a medium heat. While that was on the stove, I got my eggs ready. Once the bubbles started coming through the milk, I removed it from the heat and added the tapioca flour. I mixed until the dough was grainy and gelatinous. Once the dough was cool, I added it to the mixing bowl. Then I added the paddle attachment and set it to a medium speed. I let it mix until it smoothed out. Then I added in the eggs one at a time, waiting until the first egg was fully incorporated before adding the second. Then I measured out my cheese and added it into the bowl. I mixed on a medium speed until the cheese was fully incorporated. Once it was done, the dough was very sticky, stretchy, but had a soft consistency. I scraped the dough off the paddle attachment. I used a 1-ounce scoop to portion out the dough. I dipped my scoop into the water first and then the dough to make sure that it didn't get sticky. I made sure to space the scoops about 2 inches apart. The batter made about 20 scoops. I put the baking sheets in the oven and immediately reduced the heat to 350. After the 15 minutes, I rotated the baking sheets between the racks and from front to back. I let them cook for about 10 more minutes. Once they were done, I took them out of the oven to cool. I checked the bottom of the puffs to make sure they were golden brown. The exterior is definitely crispy. Taste test time! The outside is really crispy, but inside it's chewy and soft. It's a little bit oily, but you can definitely taste the cheese. I could have used more, but I only used about a cup. So the pâte choux was light and airy because it used bread flour, so the gluten was able to form, lots of water, and eggs. When it baked, the water and egg moisture turned into steam, puffing up the dough. The egg proteins also helped to trap the steam to create that crisp outside and hollow inside. You can also see some Maillard browning on the outside of the crisp shell of both the cheese puffs and the pâte choux. The Brazilian cheese puffs were chewy on the inside because it uses tapioca flour, which is naturally gluten-free. When mixed with hot liquid, that tapioca flour creates a stretchy and elastic texture. The added cheese also increased the moisture, richness, and chewiness. The high moisture content from the water and eggs in the pâte à choux turned into steam, expanding the dough rapidly and creating that hollow center. The gluten in the bread flour gave the dough the strength to stretch and hold that puff shape. The egg proteins coagulated during baking to give it that outer shell and firm structure. The initial high oven temperature allowed for rapid steam production and crust formation. The puffs rose in both recipes because of the steam leaving. In the pâte à choux, the water and eggs created moisture that turned into steam and allowed for it to puff up. In the cheese puffs, the moisture came from the milk, egg, and cheese moisture. The tapioca flour trapped the air and steam and made the dough stretchy. The dough needed to cool in both recipes before adding the eggs, because if you added the eggs while it was still hot, it might cook the eggs or even create scrambled eggs. This will ruin the dough's texture. Cooling the dough allows the proteins to set properly. While making the pâte à choux, the dough made the tongue and there was a lot of Maillard browning shown. If I were to make pâte à choux again, I would maybe use all-purpose flour instead of bread flour. There's more protein in bread flour, so that could have had an impact on the end result. I also think I maybe would have rotated the pans while baking. Those on the top rack initially puffed up more than those on the bottom rack because they had more access to heat initially. The recipe doesn't call for this, but I think it would help, especially since I did it with the Brazilian cheese puffs. The dough also wasn't as smooth as I thought. This could have been because of the humidity, maybe I used too many eggs, or just the flour I used. Some of my pâte à choux was really deflated, and some of it was puffy. I also could have not pricked it in time to release the steam. When I finished making the Brazilian cheese puffs, they looked and tasted like they should. The dough wasn't as smooth and creamy as the instructions said, and it didn't look like what the instructions were describing. The dough also seized in the pan, so it was hard to incorporate all the flour. I think maybe the milk boiled a little too long, or I could have added more cheese, but when I added the cheese at the end, it kind of fixed the dough, so it ended up all working out. And that's all. Thank you so much for watching. I would definitely recommend putting the ice cream with the pâte à choux.